to have our panelists today recommend actionable solutions on how they can do better, on how corporates rather can do better in creating a gender-balanced work systems, and also how women can support one another, perhaps through business and career networks, mentorships, etc. Once again, I welcome you all to this webinar. We're kicking things off now with a keynote speech from Mr. Adeniyi Adenubi. Niyi is the Executive Director of Investment Management and Investor Relations at VFD Group PLC. He's a financier and investor with about 15 years experience in the institutional banking, investment management and consulting sectors. Niyi's vast experience in the financial sector comes from working in private equity, venture capital, and financial advisory. He has played financial advisory roles to numerous firms in Nigeria and in the United Kingdom, mostly with the Royal Bank of Scotland and Atos Consulting. Niyi, welcome to this webinar. Over to you now.
Thank you so much, Esther, for the introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and allow me to stand on all existing protocols. Dear panelists, moderators, and attendees, it is my sincerest honor to be given this key opening remark at the International Women's Day 2021 event organized by VFD Group with the theme, Leave No Woman Behind, the 50% rule. From as far back as I can remember, I've always been an ally and a champion for women and women causes. Yet every year I come to a new understanding of what more myself and my establishment, VFD Group, needs to do to show more support. And this year is no different. In my role as executive director and in my personal life, I've learned that competence is not gendered. At VFD Group, we're an equal opportunity employer and will go the full length to empower women within any of our group entities until our workforce attains an equal representation of both genders. As at today, we're currently at 38% women, and we project to attain a 50% female workforce in about 18 months. We have policies that encourage women to come back to work after childbirth, and we have whistleblower policies that encourage all staff to report on untoward dealings or propositions, including sexual, both conscious and unconscious harassment or biases that make the workplace unsafe or untoward for a female employee to work in. According to a study of how childbirth affects employment and career progression, 17% of women leave employment completely in the 5 years following childbirth, compared to men's 4%. This is unacceptable, and we must change this. Also, 13% of women are promoted or moved to a new job in the 5 years following childbirth, unlike 26% of men. This is also unacceptable, and responsible citizens and corporate organizations must keep working to change this dynamic. These findings by the Institute for Social and Economic Research at the University of Bristol and Essex suggest that women suffer economically as a result of childcare responsibilities. We actually don't need an economic research from a university to tell us this. We're quite aware of this in our everyday lives, especially being Nigerians and being Africans. We also know that when women work, economies grow. Even more importantly, studies have shown that women are twice as likely than men to contribute to be contributing family workers. In other words, when you employ a woman or empower a woman, the whole family is empowered. The United Nations say that clearly that empowering women in the economy and closing gender gaps in the world of work are key to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. And we couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more also personally. As we choose to challenge societal biases and reduce systemic gender inequality by standing up for our women, empowering more women to participate equally in decision-making at all levels in our workplace, and in decision and closing the gender wage gap, we hope to have contributed in our own little way, but in no little way, to encouraging more women to remain in the formal workplace of their choosing. I look forward to the meaningful recommendations that will be made by this panel as we strive to ensure that women take their rightful place in the workplace and in the world at large. Thank you very much. Back to you, Esther.
Thank you very much, Nii. And it's very encouraging to hear what the VFD group is doing to ensure that there is gender inclusion in the workplace, generally supporting women. Very encouraging. And for those of us who do not know or not too familiar with the VFD group, it's a proprietary investment company with a vision to be a commercially viable investment company with global influence, focused on building positive and socially conscious systems. The group has investment interests in various sectors. Subsidiaries include VFD Microfinance Bank and Korea Asset Management, Dynasty Real Estate, Boardroom Apartments, Averdon, Bureau de Change, and Atiat Leasing. Now we'll now quickly move things along. I'm going to introduce my panelists for today's session. But before then, I'd like to just quickly also take some housekeeping rules. Now, the panel discussion is going to last 35 minutes, after which we'll go into a question and answer session that will last for about 12 minutes. So if you have a question, and this is to our participants for today, if you have a question for any of the panelists, please drop your questions in the chat box. And when we're done with the panel discussion, we'll take your questions. Also, let us know who among our panelists you'd like to answer your question. We'd also love you to live tweet this webinar using the hashtag Leave No Woman Behind and hashtag VFD Speaks. And for those who are unable to join us on this webinar, we're also live on YouTube, so you can join us then. So let me quickly go into our panel discussion. But first of all, of course, introduce the panelists. Welcome with me, please, Alero Balogun. Alero is the head of marketing and corporate communication and CSR at Owando PLC, where she heads the internal and external brand building efforts of the group. An advocate for digital guerrilla marketing, Alero has over 17 years experience in marketing and communications, where she's played a pivotal role, leading various teams to develop and launch some of the most dynamic initiatives to date. You're very welcome, Alero. Thank you for joining us today. Also joining us today is Nkiru Olumide-Ojo. Nkiru is a founder of Lighthouse Women's Network, a social impact group focused on workplace readiness, employability, structured mentorship, and advocacy. Nkiru has 20 years experience in corporate communications with skills leading multi-country teams in brand development and social impact. She is also a John Maxwell certified coach and the author of The Pressure Cooker, Lessons from a Woman at Work. Welcome, Nkiru, to this webinar. Also joining us today is Teresa. Thank you. Also joining us today is Teresa Eze. Teresa has spent the last 7 years working in financial services and 8 years before that in banking. She holds an MBA from the London School of Business and Finance, a postgraduate diploma in strategic management from Stratford Academy, United Kingdom, and a BSc in Management Information System from Covenant University, Ottawa. Teresa was previously the head of the VFD Group Treasury Unit and currently serves as the managing director of Averdon Bureau de Change, the currency exchange business of VFD Group. Thank you all for joining us. Pleasure to have you on today's panel. Leave no woman behind, the 50% rule. Alero, I will start with you. Now, there's been a recent flurry of female appointments in some global organizations. Would you say this is an evidence of a better understanding of the merits of gender equality in the corporate sector, or would you say is just what we're seeing is a bandwagon effect?
I think it's a little difficult to tell. I think time will tell in terms of the value that these women bring. If across board there's a belief that the women have an added value, then it feels as if you have done token representation. Women have clamored to be brought to the table. We brought them to the table. They're not adding value. So what I always say is that it's less about us clamoring to want to be on the table. What we're saying is give us the same opportunities that you give men, and then you pick who you believe is best. So if you've elected women into these roles or you've appointed them into these roles, I want to believe it is because you believe they're the best or they will provide the best. And so time will tell, depending on the value that they bring.
Okay. Including now, some organizations still struggle to see how the existing normal system is skewed in favor of men. How can it be made clearer that equality can include creating specific conditions that level the playing field for both genders? Are there any examples perhaps that you can point to that have proven effective?
Look, I think first the numbers don't lie. And when I say the numbers don't lie, I think it's McKinsey who brought out a research that showed that companies who had females on their board had upwards of 60% returns on capital invested. And I think probably up to 85% for return on equity, and maybe 25% for return on sales or something to that effect. But I think first, the numbers don't lie. So it's so important to demonstrate, using numbers, that there is a difference when you have women on the board. Now, to the second question of what must they do? Look, I think that they must be deliberate, with creating room for women on the table. And by being deliberate, I mean, what are the policies? What are the deliberate, development plans or interventions, depending on how wide your gap is, that has been put in place to ensure that, women are evenly represented and are provided with the right equity, as men have. And, depending on where you are, I worked in the Nigerian financial banking sector for a number of years. And I know that there is a policy that requires of financial or banking institutions to have a certain number of females represented from management cadre. So I think, having policies is very critical. And also, as the organization, having development plans or interventions to handhold women as they journey through this cadre would be my best recommendations.
Okay, Tessa, let me come to you now. Let's talk about tokenism. When is it tokenism, and should one accept an opportunity that is clearly a token?
I think that is tokenism when a female is just appointed to a role, not necessarily because she's the best fit, but just because the numbers we're trying to add up or make up the numbers per representation as it is. And I don't think that it's a good opportunity to accept, because already there's a bias about the fact that this role is just being filled by a woman because we want it to be filled by a woman. I would expect that a better approach would be provide the same opportunities, just as Alero had also cited earlier, provide the same opportunities, provide the same level playing grounds, and on the basis of those evaluations, pick the woman who is the best fit for the job. And we would also expect that under such circumstances, where it is a woman who is best suited for a job, they are not unnecessarily discriminated against in terms of expectations about the long run, which also are part of the basis on which women are sidelines for roles where they ordinarily would have been the best fit. So when it's tokenism and it is obvious that that's what it is, I wouldn't encourage the roles to be taken up by women in such cases. It should be more on merit based on the value that women can bring onto the table.
Okay, I was going to ask a follow-up question to that, because we know that in many corporate organizations, especially where there is a lot of competition, and some women are maybe qualified, maybe competent, but haven't had that opportunity come their way. So for those young professional women who are still climbing the ladder, they see this opportunity. They know it's tokenism, but then they tell themselves, look, this is also an opportunity for me to prove myself that it might be tokenism, but I can do the job. What do you say to such a young female professional?
I would also encourage that, because if in the first place tokenism was displayed and the woman was given the platform, the best thing to actually do is take that opportunity and prove the parties that were expecting failure wrong. Because if you do your best in that position as a woman, beyond also creating possible opportunities for yourself to move upwards, you also make it easier for other women to be appointed into similar type roles.
Okay, I'm going to ask a general question I'll take it round. Now, women, let me come back to Alero. Women seem to be natural allies and dependable support system for men. Do more women need to support and speak up for women? What I have found, especially speaking to female politicians in the course of my job, they don't get so much support from other women. They go to these communities, they interact with them, they listen to what the challenges are, and they genuinely want to help. But come election day, it's a different story entirely. There are still these cultural barriers that even amongst women, I'm just wondering, how do we break through these barriers and have women also be champions for other women?
Yes, it is important that we champion other women, but I also think it's important that we champion men championing us. The reality is, when men succeed in organizations, there's a certain way that they think, there's a certain way that they approach different things, and we must be able to get that guidance from them. I think as we go up in the career ladder and as we become more senior, I'm hoping, I speak for myself, we take learnings from what we didn't get from those who were senior to us. And we're now, like Nkiru had said, just a little bit more deliberate in mentoring and sponsoring the younger ladies. Another thing that I was going to bring is that a lot of the time we speak from an organizational perspective, but I think in being intentional, we must also remember that every single woman here is an employer of labor. And if you're not getting it right at home, even though you think you're getting it right at work, you're not. And when I say this, I mean, if you think about nannies and drivers, you pay your driver more. In my opinion, your driver does less work. The expectation is that your driver should be educated to a degree because he will go to the bank and he'll do bank runs. There's certain things he will do. I don't necessarily have that expectations of my nanny. And so what happens is, how do we truly change the tide? If the only people who understand gender parity are those who are educated, what I should be doing is ensuring my nanny is educated, not necessarily skills acquisition, but let her know how to write, let her be able to speak English properly, let her understand finances, let her learn how to drive. If she's able to do that, then she teaches her daughter, who hopefully will be educated and will go into the corporate world like the rest of us. So yes, there is work that we need to do in lifting ourselves up within the organization, but even also from the home perspective.
Okay, we'll come back for another round talking about mentorship and the importance of creating strong networks for women. But Nkiru, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Champions of women supporting women.
Right, Esther, before I respond to that, can I just step back, to the question into tokenism, only because it's a pet peeve for me. And the point I really want to make is for us to understand the size of the gap. So I saw a research from Creative Leadership Academy, and it talks about, and I think the study was done even, I think in the Western world somewhere, I think in America, and it talks about the gap between men and women, at a VP level being about 25, it will take 25 years to close the gap. And, for the rest of the cadre, it will take 100 years. I think the reason I'm putting down this dramatic stats is to say that we've got to be careful or approach what we think as tokenism in a different light. And what do I mean? If we're trying to close a gap that will take 100 years, then we must take as much as we can. And in taking the roles, we must then be burdened by the fact that we're not just representing ourselves, we're representing the gender. And, in Tanzania, what has happened is the president has passed and the vice president, who's a female, has become the president. Now she's going to do that job so well, because she's representing the gender, that when an independent candidate comes up to say, I can be the president of this country, everyone will say, yes, because we've seen it. But if we don't have those opportunities, because we feel like, we're being handed tokens, then we'll never make a difference. Then we'll never represent the gender. So it's just important for us to keep those stacked numbers in front of us to understand the large amount of battle, that we're fighting. Now to the question around women supporting women. Look, I think I'll take my response from Aisha Osori's book, and anyone who hasn't read it should please read it. It's called Love Does Not Win Elections. When you read that book, you would find, and it stunned me, and I feel like you read it, Esther, because I see you smiling, that she got the least support from women. And I mean, it was quite a surprise to me. So it was the women politicians not supporting her, and the men providing more support. But I just literally say to myself, we've got to assume that people are not aware and people don't know better. I like Maya Angelou's words. She says, when you know better, you will do better. So I feel like the reason we have this, conferences, webinars, talk shops, is so that we can say to other women, it's so important that you support the gender when you find her, because she's already up against a lot. So I think my point is we have to assume that people don't know, and therefore now say to people, you have to support her because she's up against a masculine corporate culture, she's outnumbered, she's up against a lot. So we're going to assume that this is part of the awareness of saying to women, please support, other women in their career journeys.
Okay, Tessie, do you agree?
Yes, I agree to a very large extent, especially the part that speaks to the fact that already women are up against a whole lot already to add to contend with women not even supporting them. If we as women are able to build kinship with each other, especially where you find people in positions where a little prop from you doesn't even affect you, but would go a long way and mean a lot to that other woman, then as much as possible, we should throw in our weight behind these other women when we find opportunities to do so.
Okay. Now, Alero, I would like to draw your attention. I don't know, but it's something that's been on my mind. I want to talk about the confidence gap. Now, this is also within the corporate organization. I know it's a contentious issue, but it's still true to some extent because there is a body of literature that supports it, that women on many fronts are less likely to be confident. I mean, she's one who's, we're a little more hesitant when we want to ask for a pay rise. We're a little more hesitant when it comes to applying for a higher position, etc. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on this confidence gap and how we are approaching it in today's world, especially for the younger women who are coming up. Alero, what are your thoughts on the confidence gap and how we can begin to address this issue? Because you'll be, I mean, in the course of my job, even women who have attained the highest, pinnacle of their careers, it's still there.
It is there. Even I suffer from it. And I think what Nkiru has said is true. For those who have not mentored or lifted other women up, we must make the assumption that they didn't know better. So I think we have a role in lifting women up and explaining to them that it is normal to suffer from imposter syndrome. It is normal to not be sure of yourself. But that for every time you go out there and you make a presentation and it's great, it's a tick in the box that yes, you can do it, and it starts to build your confidence. But I think everyone suffers from it, both men and women. Men are just a little bit better at masking it and going into meetings and being the loudest in the room. But it's very much about reiterating to women that if you have gotten to this point, you are good at what you do. And you have to constantly remind yourself that you're good. And for every time you do well, take it as a pat on the shoulder to do better. And when you don't do well, I think we're our worst critics. When we don't do well, we spend so much time feeling guilty and beating ourselves up and understanding that even the greatest leaders make mistakes and that you've made a mistake that you haven't done well. Take learnings from it, get up and move on. But a lot of that is around having a community of support, whether those are seniors or whether even females in your group. There are different kinds of women. You'll have in your group women who are very confident and who help lift you up, women who are not as confident, who give you advice on how they sort of manage things. So I think it's very much about a support system that helps lift you up.
Absolutely correct. We'll talk about support systems more. Now, Nkiru, in your years of being on the front line as a female enthusiast and professional, what are some of the most common organizational hindrances to gender equality that you have had to address? And how did you do it?
Look, I think, Esther, I think it's always important, even though we acknowledge that there are very many external factors. And I think it's very important to acknowledge the internal factors. And look, I think the first internal factor would be the mindset. And, it's the mindset that one needs to adjust to. And it's the mindset, even if you are in a predominantly male environment, not to feel like the victim. It's a mindset, and a confidence. I just heard you on Alero talk about confidence, and the confidence to feel like I'm also bringing, good value, to the table. And I think lastly would probably be courage I mean, I speak of courage, so often, ever so often, because it's, something I'm fixated on. I say to people, you need courage all the time, for different phases of your life. I heard you and Alera just speak very quickly about making errors. You need courage to stand up when you have failed, because failure, as long as you're doing work, is inevitable. So it is your mindset, it's having a mindset shift, is understanding that you bring, good value to the table. And then it's also courage. I mean, it's courage. It's courage for little things such as speaking up in meetings. I say to people, oftentimes they would say, why is this backdrop white? And a woman is mulling in her heart. She's saying, it's white because, backgrounds are better white. And why she's still mulling? And I have said, it's white because, and she's thinking, damn, but I know that. So these are the little areas, where I say that you need courage to be able to speak up in meetings. Very essential, really essential. Thanks, Esther. Handing over to you.
Okay, let me come to Tessie. Now, Tessie, I'd like us to just briefly talk about the young professional women, many of whom I believe are watching today and looking up to the older women with more experience. Would you say entry-level female career professionals today have it easier than you did when you were starting out? Is it easier to get to the top today? Okay, looks like Teresa, can you hear me? Okay, perhaps Alera, you can answer that question. What would you say that young professional women have it easier today? I mean, 40, 50 years ago, we didn't exactly have conversations like this. There wasn't this level of enlightenment, this level of awareness and courage, like Inkiri said. More women are speaking up, and whether or not we like it, more women are actually supporting women these days. But what are your thoughts?
I don't think it's easier. I think there's just more awareness, and there are more platforms for us to engage for guidance and solutions. If we look at the data, yes, there has been a reduction in the gender gap, but I know based on what I've read, it said it's about 99.5 years before we address that gender gap. It's down from 108 years, which was in 2018. However, there is this gender gap. What you're saying to me is that in my children's lifetime, my grandchildren's lifetime, my great-grandchildren, it's still quite a while before we address or we solve this gender gap. So for that reason alone, I don't think it's easier. I think what you have is just more awareness.
But how easy is it? Tessie, let me bring you in. Thank you for, okay, good to have you back. But when we hear about these numbers, 20 years, in fact, the World Economic Forum says it would take 250 years. And when I saw that number, I said 250 years, how, that is so discouraging. So when you see such numbers, what do we need to do to fast track? Is there anything that we can do to make what we have, the little that we have, count and perhaps gather more momentum?
Yes, I think there is some things that we can do, and it's at different levels. For one, we need to grab as much as we can. So rather than aiming at 50-50, I think the drive should be for a wider margin of ownership. Like we should drive to grab more than that, because this gender gap that is being estimated at this number of years are based on the 50-50 equality count. So if as of now, the focus is on getting more, laying our hands on more of these positions and taking up more leadership roles, taking up more professional roles, then it would reduce the gap with respect to timing. On the other hand, policies, organizations can make conscious efforts to put up policies that would also encourage recruitment of more females, less discrimination of females, equal opportunities for both males and females, and as well as not putting up unnecessary upheavals in the pathway for females' growth, professional growth in their career.
Now, I'm happy you mentioned those. I was going to ask you as a follow-up question, what are those systemic barriers that are peculiar to the Nigerian corporate system, the offices here? What are those that we see, that we know that perhaps peculiar to the Nigerian environment that continue to hold women back from progressing in their careers?
From my viewpoint, one predominant barrier is the traditional gender role segregation. The fact that already you relegate certain type of roles as non-feminine in organizations already puts in place that barrier So it starts from personal sensitization. And like Nkiru also mentioned, assumption that the woman next to you doesn't know that there is a possibility for her to encourage the other person. So continue to put out the word, and beyond putting out the word, continue to provide mentorship to the young ones, continue to point them in the right directions, and continue to support the other women around you that are doing things that, were previously thought unachievable for women.
Now, Alera, obviously, if we're going to see change, it has to start at the highest level, especially within the corporate. How do we get corporate? How do we get those who are at the helm of the decisions? How do we get them to listen and to also perhaps look past? Because one thing we have discussed already is that some organizations do not think that some of these policies are skewed towards men. They simply can't see it, even when the data is there. So within the Nigerian context, how can we get those whose table it stops on to understand and see that, look, this is what is actually happening?
There's a conversation about getting them to understand the value that women bring, but there's also truly getting them to understand what we're asking for. I think there's a lack of understanding of what we're asking for. I use the fact that every time we celebrate International Women's Day and we have these conversations in my office and we put up things on social media, when I come home, some of the comments my husband makes me realize that they still don't understand what we're asking for, which is, please give me the same opportunities. I'm not asking for you to elevate me, even though it's not on merit. I want you to elevate me because you believe it's on merit. I'm not asking you to treat me with sensitivity because I'm pregnant. Pregnancy is not a disability. Women in villages get pregnant and go to the farm. Women in villages have babies and go to the farm the next day. But there's this idea that what we're asking for is either to be promoted without merit or be treated with kids' gloves. We don't want to be treated with kids' gloves, and also not making assumptions on what you believe is best for me. I've been to a women's session where a senior male leader said he wouldn't give men paternity leave because in his opinion, it is the woman who stays at home to look after the child. So if he gives a man paternity leave, the man is just going to play at home. You have made that decision for me. You don't know what the dynamics are in my home. Why would you assume that if you give a man paternity leave, he's going to play at home and he's not going to look after the children and I am going to go to work? So I think it's really getting them to truly understand what we're asking for and the value that we bring.
Okay, thank you. Let me throw a general question. Nkiru, for going forward, would you say that, because it would appear that our approach now is top-bottom, we always say that, yes, obviously, it's probably going to be the most effective. Those who matter, those who are the decision makers, we can get them to make a change. But I've also heard conversations about beyond the work, beyond the corporate life, beyond the career, we should also begin to create a general awareness on the importance of women in all spheres of life, in terms of what they can do and what they can bring to the table. Should we be teaching this in schools, or should we just leave it to the confines of the corporate, the offices, and just, okay, it's about a career, it's about work, let's just leave it here? Or should the awareness expand beyond that?
Look, I think that there is, and that's not to say that it's sufficient, but there is a lot of awareness, going on across strata. I mean, I say so because I've got a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old who are very much aware. And I mean, there's lots of things, my children even say to me, because they really have now gone on to the extremes. They'll say to me, Mama, you guys all go on about this whole feminist thing. If a girl says, shut up to me, and I say, shut up back, then they say I had no right, to say it. So, I mean, I'm giving this dramatic example to say that, conversations are going on, and that's important. Having said that, I think that the biggest challenge that we face is the unlearning. And, I say the unlearning because even though these conversations are going on, these are people who have, been acculturized for many years. Alero gave the example of her household, having acculturized for many years about men do this and women do this. So it will take a while, for people to unlearn, all of those things that they have learned over the years. But it's important that we keep the conversation going. And even in the choice of terms, that we use, You know, for years, I didn't even realize that there was a bias with using the term man hours. So I'll say, how many man hours have they spent on this task? And they say, there's nothing like man hours, please. It's working hours. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And now this is me who thinks I'm a female enthusiast. I'm a. So it just shows how much unlearning, you know, there needs to be. Look, I'm glad that it's going on, but I think that the biggest form of unlearning would be, you know, finding a deterrent. And, you know, it's putting in place, you know, deterrents, whether at home, you know, privately. So I'm the mother, I'm at work. They say all these things about feminism. I go home, I educate my children. You know, my children are going to school with the person, even if it's an Uber driver, they educate. So there's a halo effect, you know, going on. But there also needs to be a larger societal deterrent. And I say so because if people don't realize that there's a penalty, you know, for someone coming to have a go at a female's body, he's just going to do it, because when he does it, what's the worst thing that happens? Just a lot of talk and no action. So I feel like the overall aim of this awareness is having a deterrent. So you do that, this happens to you. You do that, this happens to you. I feel like that would be a great place to be at.
All right, I don't know, would you say that we have that culture, or you're seeing that culture within corporate Nigeria, where women are protected in that respect?
I can't speak for corporate Nigeria. What I will say is that what we've started to do is, yes, we've started to implement the policies. You've started to see certain facilities come up, i.e. lactation rooms, special parking spaces for women who are pregnant. You're starting to see the change. However, effective change is when on a consistent basis, you evaluate whether these things that you've put in place actually work. So when you say to me that as a bank, I have a whistleblowing hotline, if in a year, 2 years, 3 years, no woman calls with regard to sexual harassment, it's not working. And so we sort of speak to all these things that we're doing, but is anyone taking a step back to actually evaluate, is it working? Because I've been in rooms where women talk about the things that happen in their workplace in terms of harassment, and I'm stunned. And the advice that they get is run away from these men, as opposed to, one, these men being sent out of the organization. So as an organization, yes, you've done these things, but are they working? Are you evaluating to see if they work? And if they don't work, are you having those focus group sessions with the relevant women to understand, okay, why aren't you using the hotline? Has there been an experience where someone has used it and there's been repercussions for them? So really for me, we need to evaluate, and then we will start to improve what we're putting out there.
Well, Teresa, I'm interested in hearing your opinion on that. Would you say that today's workplace is a safer place for women than it was a decade ago?
For me, it's a yes and a no answer. The yes side is the fact that increasingly there is more and more awareness being put out. People are becoming more aware. Just like Nkiru just cited, her kids have those discussions. It's coming into the educational space. More of this communication is being pushed out even in the corporate space, even if we cannot speak for the corporate Nigeria, but in individual corporate organizations, more of these communications are being pronounced. So that on that note, it is a yes. But on the no side, it is the fact that the issue of tokenism to a large extent exists. And on that basis, you cannot genuinely say that equal opportunities are provided as it is, as they were currently. We cannot say that equal opportunities are provided to both male and females. And based on that, it's a no. What we can now do is what we have continually spoken about today, which is to create more awareness, do your bit in the circles that you have influence in your immediate staff, how you interact with them, how you encourage them to utilize feedback mechanisms you have put in place to ensure that women are not discriminated or unnecessarily sexualized. Ensure that these practices are being utilized by the staff. If there's a gap, engage further, because it's not enough to just have these rules in place. It's not enough to create the enablement and awareness. there's also that need for constant follow-up to ensure that these things are actually being imbibed and being utilized.
Okay, now Nkiru, we're bringing this conversation, we're slowly winding down. We're going to go very soon into a Q&A session. So just recommendations, Nkiru, based on what you've seen, I mean, having worked for a while in corporate Nigeria, experts tell us that real change in the workplace requires a systemic approach, not just interventions targeting individuals or groups. For you, based on what you've seen, what would you like to see happen differently? We've seen how COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact, taken a toll on women compared to men. More women have left the workforce, and etc. It's just a mess. So, but for you, what would you like to see happen as we celebrate as we wind down celebrations of International Women's Day?
Look, Esther, I'd like to give you a long list, right? And those lists will probably be valid. But I think the easiest thing to say is for people to align their actions with their words. And I feel like if more corporates, align their actions to their words, and just the easiest case study, a celebration of women and understanding what women deserve is not left for the 8th of March or the month of March every year. It is a part of your policy. It is a part of your remuneration. It is a part of your corporate culture, only because you are overturning the masculine corporate culture. So I feel like if we can even do 50% of the things that we say, because there is a lot of talk going on, if we can do 50% of what we say, I think we'll be on our journey to good success.
Alero, what would you like to see happen differently?
What would I like?
I know we've said a lot, but just perhaps something that's personal to you that would make you very happy to see.
Just being a little bit more active in education. And when I speak to education, I don't mean education on social media or through marketing communications. I mean education internally, education for all levels of staff. One of the things that we had done in our organization was we did research just to understand from men, when you do ABC, do you understand how it makes women feel? And a lot of the time you have men who go, oh, I didn't mean any harm by saying that. I didn't mean any harm by doing this, and the realization that we also make some assumptions. So rather than making assumptions, let us start to educate one another. Like Nkiru had said, even with my son never sees me in the kitchen and assumes I can't cook, and probably assumes that a lot of women can't cook because his mother is never in the kitchen. And that's fine for me. I want him to grow up with that attitude. But if you understand that in the workplace, there are quite a few older men who don't necessarily have this knowledge and sometimes aren't trying to be mean. And we being just deliberate in doing that education, not leaving it to a special day where they go, oh my God, women seem to be whining about they want this, they want that. But consistent education, looking for every opportunity to educate them on how to do things better and how to be better.
Tessie. What would you like to see?
Okay,
Perhaps something new, something a little different.
For me, I would like to see women have access to more women. And when I say have access to more women, it is with respect to, women form a distinct consumer group, and we have unique capabilities to understand and interpret situations, challenges, interpret situations that we find ourselves in. So if women have access to more women, particularly through things like mentorship, more educational opportunities being brought to women, especially if women are the ones championing it, and building more kinship towards women, both on those older and younger than you, and going across age groups and levels, career positions at the time and all of that. If you go through, permeate all of those, and women have access to more women, I think that it would, in the long run, lead to a better representation of women and, some changes in these mindsets and biases that are already core of our corporate cultures.
Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to appreciate everyone who has spoken today. Thank you to our panelists. But of course, we're just quickly going to go into a Q&A session. Our time is fast spent. I have a couple of questions, but a good number of them do not have names. So to our panelists, to our participants who have sent in questions, please, would like you to attach your names to them. So there's a question that came in for Alera from an anonymous person, and she says that women I expect in the workplace are expected to be less feminine and perhaps a little more aggressive when they go about their duties, to show that they're more competent, or to perhaps put them on some kind of level playing field with the men. What would you advise a woman in that position to do? Alera.
I think we should be who we are. If anything, it takes them by surprise. I work for an oil and gas company. I always speak of a particular engineer who is extremely poised, always made up, always dressed beautifully. And the consistent comment is, oh, we wouldn't expect you to be a senior engineer. We wouldn't expect you to be so intelligent. We wouldn't expect you to be so soft-spoken. If anything, she goes into meetings and she takes all the men by surprise, because the expectation is she's not going to be able to add much value. So for me, own who you are. If you are confident and aggressive, then that's who you are. I don't necessarily think it always works, whether for a man or for a woman. I think we can have conversations without being aggressive. If you're not aggressive, you're softly spoken, own it. As long as you're able to go into meetings, go into sessions and you're adding value, you're speaking with confidence, what you're saying makes sense, just own who you are.
Atesi, there's a question here for you from an anonymous person who is asking, who wants to know what is the policy at VFD Group in terms of the childbirth policy. When a woman has had her baby, what is the policy that makes it easier or helps the woman return back to work in a manner that is not too disruptive to her career?
The policies we have currently that makes it flexible for a returning nursing mother are flexibility of work hours, and that was pre-COVID. Post-COVID, amendments have not been made, but pre-COVID, there was flexibility of work hours. So if you're supposed to do practically 8 to 2 and go home at 2, if it works better for you to do 10 to 4, then you have the liberty of that. Just choose the hours that work best for you and fit it into your schedule. We also had we made it possible for nursing mothers to be able to come in with their babies into the office every once in a while, because we had an area in the office where nursing mothers could use. And then we had a expression room, which is the space we created for nursing mothers to be able to go express their milk while at work and store them to take them home. So those are policies that we have in place for nursing mothers.
Okay, Nkiru, I see a question here, and the participant is asking, she's generally saying that the call for female gender parity, gender equality, doesn't it make us women look like we expect some kind of favoritism? Doesn't it make us look weak? What is your response to that?
Look, I don't think so. I know that a lot of the data that we have seen are all Western, but this is the Western world. I think it gives an indication of even farther the gap is. If you think about, the continent as a whole, I think probably Rwanda is the one who has, and it is by policy, by the way, the most balanced, in the parliament, which is 50-50. I read somewhere that the women are slightly now outnumbering. I think Uganda is next. And these are the people who have had data. If I ask the person who's questioning to say, in your state, how many seats do you have, in parliament for women? If I ask her to think about our own parliament, how many seats we have, I think it's indicative of the gap. And I think that until the gap is closed, there's no room for sentiment, because it'll take, you said 250 years from the World Economic Forum. I even saw 100. It's been postulated to take decades to close it. So the more that we can do at this time, the better for us. And look, with anything and with any process, there is bound to be abuse, because I feel like that's where the questioner, without having context, is coming from. So with things like this, there'll be people who are doubly pushing the boundaries and people who are being excessive, but let's just keep our eyes on the goal, which is to shorten the gap.
Okay, there is a question. Okay, there's a question here, no name on it, but I suppose she's a young professional. She says she works in the hospitality business sector, and she appears to be a manager, but her subordinates appear to be older than she is. And she says she's having to face cultural issues where, because her subordinates are older than her, she's unable to fully delegate, as it were. Because of that age, they expect that she would not speak to them in certain ways because of her age, as it were. Tessie, would you like to answer that question? We can take it round.
So in such cases, hello, Nkira.
Go ahead.
Okay, can you take the later part of the question again, please?
So how does she deal with such a situation where she's a manager and her subordinates are older than she is, and they're having trouble taking instructions from her because of her age?
Oh, okay. So I would like to steal Alera's line where she had mentioned earlier that you should own your bit. Irrespective of age prejudices, we shouldn't come into the workplace with those age biases. That's also something else organizations have been pushing, the fact that we've taken away titles from people's names. So if you own your bit, and it also speaks to the confidence gap that you had mentioned earlier, Esther. If you own your bit and recognize the power that your role affords you, it makes it easier for you to engage when there are clear reporting patterns or guidelines in your organization. So what we might need to speak to will be, what's the reporting patterns like? What are the reporting guidance like? Is there a clear stance that the company takes with respect to hierarchy? And how does the company's policy address things like insubordination? However, I would advise her to own her bit, stand her grounds, and follow things officially, take necessary actions officially, following the company's own guidelines concerning insubordination and issues like that.
Okay, we have less than 5 minutes left because we didn't start in time. I'm trying to manage the last few minutes that we have. Nkira, I know you want to answer this question, so I'll give you about a minute to answer it. I thought from your body language, it seemed like you wanted to answer that question.
Right. Look, I think that, and Tessie made mention of it. Look, I think we're all in the workplace to work, And, whilst I say so, it's important, that we deal with people professionally and respectfully. I think that if the lady or the person is looking for clarity, it's important, to have KPIs. I think that that's the language of the workplace. And, the language of the workplace is KPIs. So please set the KPIs and please deal respectfully, professionally. But, I don't think that your role, is trying to make yourself less than who you are, just to accommodate, cultural nuances. I say to my children, I say to them often, I say, you are in the real world, you actually are a human being, an individual. Obviously, it's only in our culture that you are a child that people will think about your age, but just think about yourself as a human being. And that's how she should deal with them, respectfully, professionally. But the language of the workplace is KPIs. So she should please provide them with their KPIs so everyone is focused.
Now, Lera, finally for you, we talked earlier about having male champions also to support women. For the young professional man himself, perhaps how can we bring them in? Can we bring them on board to also support? Because there's a study that I saw that showed that many times in the workplace, men can tell those women who are not confident enough to do this task or go for that job, but they don't want to come across as being sexist. So in this age where we are, where, one is very mindful of what one says to, across both genders, as it were. But what would you advise in terms of how we can have more male champions among the younger male professionals now?
I think if there's anything COVID has taught us is that we need to be more empathic, we need to pay a little bit more attention, and we need to be kinder. Yes, we work in organizations and it's very much a professional setting, but empathy says that I pay attention. I pay attention to the different people within my team. And when you pay attention and when you're kinder and a little bit more deliberate in your actions, it means even without necessarily trying, As a man, you're mentoring both the men and the women. It's not exclusive to men, and it's not exclusive to women. And because you're empathic and you're paying attention, you notice when things don't seem quite right. You're asking the right questions. And the more that you do that, as a man, you become more comfortable, and the more senior you go in a role. And when you're in a position where you can develop policies and implement policies, it just becomes natural to you, because when you started, you were just very deliberate. You were deliberate in listening, you were deliberate in paying attention, you were deliberate in having those uncomfortable conversations.
Thank you so much to our panelists today. Our time is fast spent. And I guess in summary, just to point to a few key takeaways, I guess the conversation should continue, must continue, even though many of the things we talk about them every year, but we cannot keep quiet. Advocacy must continue. If it takes 100 years, obviously the best time to make change is today, and we'll continue to talk about that, creating awareness, particularly within in corporate Nigeria, to ensure that policies, many of the policies taken also support women, and more importantly, having more women in the room, having more women in decision-making places, because there's I saw a report which actually showed that when women are seated at the decision-making table, better decisions are actually made for the benefit of everybody, actually. So it's not about, because she's a woman, she can do better. But yes, but put a woman in the room, you will see the difference. Thank you so much to our panelists today. Thank you to Alero Balogun, Head of Marketing and Corporate Communications at CSR at Owando PLC. A big thank you to Nkiru Olumide Ojo. Nkiru is the founder of Lighthouse Women's Network, a social impact group focused on workplace readiness, employability, and structured mentorship. Also joining us today has been Teresa Eze. Teresa was previously the head of VFD Group Treasury Unit and currently serves as the managing director of Everdon Bureau de Change, the currency exchange business of VFDN. And also to quickly just remind us about the service offerings of VFD. It's a proprietary investment company with a vision to be a commercially viable investment company with global influence focused on building positive and socially conscious ecosystems. If you want to know more, and this is to our participants now, you want to know more about a VFD Group, please visit the company's website. It's www.vfdgroup.com. Social media handles for Instagram is at vfd.group. Twitter and Facebook at VFD Group, and LinkedIn, you can find the company VFD Group PLC also on LinkedIn. Thank you so much to our participants today. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Nii for that keynote speech, and of course showing us what the VFD Group also is doing in terms of closing that gender gap and giving women more opportunities and also a seat at the table. Thank you so much to everyone who has been a part of today's webinar. My name is Esther Awoniyi. I'm an anchor at CNBC Africa. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, and bye.